Hi! In my last video, I ranked every boss fight in Deltarune. Spoilers for that list, but I placed the Roaring Knight at 6th, making it one of my favorite fights in the game. However, in the video I did express how as a secret boss I was sort of underwhelmed by it, and it seems I'm not the only one. A lot of people share the sentiment that it kinda just feels like there isn't a secret boss in the chapter. In fact, I felt this way so much that I renamed secret bosses to bonus bosses in that video, because secret just didn't feel right anymore. Although in the comments I saw people suggest both super bosses and crystal bosses as potential names, and my first thought was, man, what was I cooking with bonus bosses? They're both so much better. Anyway, so crystal bosses. What's the problem with the knight? And more importantly, what could have been done differently? Well, I'm not a writer or game developer or smart person, so clearly people need me to come in and settle this. Today I want to talk about the knight, what was done right, wrong, and if I would change anything. This is also kind of my idea for a Ramb crystal boss for some reason, just because I think he's cool. Okay, let's jam. So to start, let's talk about how the knight functions. After the Tenna fight, just when things are starting to recover, Tenna is suddenly killed. Walking forward reveals it was the Roaring Knight who did it, the main villain of Deltarune, the one who's been opening all the dark fountains. From there, you fight, and this is where things get complicated. Now, being a fight that you can play, and not a cutscene, it is possible to beat them. But being by far the hardest fight in Deltarune, it's not likely, especially because Tenna probably left you with very little health. You can heal between fights by backtracking to this save, but like, who's gonna do that their first time through? Once you inevitably die to the knight, a cutscene plays, he steals Undyne, blah blah blah, Deltarune plot stuff, I don't need to get into it. Point is, there's a fight that you're set up to lose. So how is this a crystal boss? Well, if you do end up winning, you break a shadow crystal off the knight's sword. Shadow crystals are these things that are maybe important, I don't know. There's one per chapter, the other 3 of which come from the other crystal bosses, hence the name crystal bosses. Usually they involve doing a long side quest resulting in a boss that, and I can't stress this enough, isn't fought normally. They're extra, they're optional, which is what makes the knight so polarizing. To be fair, there is a long quest assigned to this fight, but it's not technically required, which I think disappointed a lot of people. However, to play defense for a second, if the knight was going to be the crystal boss of this chapter, like if that had to be the case, then there wasn't much to be done here. You can't just make it where only people who did the side quest fight them, because again, this is the main villain of Deltarune. The story would have to be changed too much between playthroughs to really be feasible, so I understand that. But that begs the question, should the knight have been the crystal boss at all? And should it have been Ramb? I promise I'll explain who that is soon, okay? Well, we're not quite done here, cause as I alluded to, there is a quest assigned to this fight, just not in the traditional sense. To start, you have to get an S rank on the first board. Oh yeah, if you haven't played Deltarune, you're on a game show and get graded based on how you do. If you get an S rank, or a Z rank, technically both work, you can enter the exclusive S rank changing room. Here you can find Ramb, who tells you that you're playing a modified game and that the original is backstage. He also mentions freedom. I wonder if that's important to anything. Anyway, going backstage, you get to play a modified version of the first board where you get a sword and can kill enemies. I'm not going to go too in depth on these minigames since it'd basically just be a walkthrough and that's not my purpose here, so just know it requires some weird steps and ends with you getting an ice key. This continues after the second board where once again you have to get an S or Z rank. Here you have to kill even more enemies and eventually have to use the ice key. Here you do some more stuff, blah blah blah, skip. Not to say these minigames are boring, I like them a lot, and the fact it parodies the weird route is super interesting. It again just doesn't really apply to the current discussion. Finally, after the game show falls apart, you have to go to the S rank room one more time, and once again, kill more enemies. This ends with you meeting this thing. I think the name people are going with is Ramb, but I prefer John Mantle, so let's go with that. Anyway, here is actually a boss fight in the Zelda style. I've seen a lot of people argue this is the true secret or crystal boss of this chapter, and to be fair, I can see where they're coming from. It's completely optional and gives you a reward, but it doesn't give you the shadow crystal. It instead gives you the shadow mantle, which you can use to make the knight fight easier. So I guess indirectly this fight sort of relates to the shadow crystal, but I'm gonna keep things simple. If the boss gives you a shadow crystal for beating it, it's the crystal boss. Sorry, John. Now, this all begs the question, why is it like this? Why didn't Toby Fox use the same formula he did for the other crystal bosses? And I've actually seen 2 possible explanations, one of which I really like. The first one is simply just to be unpredictable. It would get sort of boring if the fights followed the same pattern every chapter, so this is just to mix things up a bit. The other thing I've heard is the one I like more, and that's for story reasons. See, it can be assumed that the knight has been the one handing out the shadow crystals. I mean, the weapon is made out of it apparently, so it really couldn't be anyone else. Unless it's Gaster, I guess, but he doesn't exist. So if we assume the knight's been handing these out to the crystal bosses, then there's a very simple explanation as to why they didn't this time. They didn't have time. See, this Dark Fountain was opened by Chris, as we see at the end of Chapter 2. The knight kills Tenna right at the end, so it can be assumed they only just got to this Dark World. So if we operate under the assumption that the knight just arrived, then it's clear why no shadow crystals were handed out. When would they have done it? by the time they get there, the Lancer fan club is already about to steal it. There'd be no point. I actually really like this theory, and something else I like about it is how it carries into Chapter 4. The Chapter 4 Shadow Crystal holder is Gerson, but unlike the other crystal bosses, he doesn't go insane upon receiving it. In fact, he describes it as a weird piece of glass that he found in his desk, and that it doesn't really interest him. Clearly, giving the Shadow Crystal to Gerson wasn't the best choice, considering he didn't even use it. So I've seen a few people suggest, what if the knight was rushed here too? When you get to Gerson's study, the knight was apparently there and left right before you got there. So what if they tried to find a suitable holder for the Shadow Crystal and instead had to settle on Gerson because they were rushed once again? Now admittedly, is this theory a bit far-fetched? Yes, and it also assumes a lot about the Shadow Crystal's purpose, which we're still not clear on. However, I like it and wanted to bring it up. If you disagree, feel free to share that in the comments. I think even if you disagree with the Chapter 4 stuff, the Chapter 3 one at the very least makes more sense. And I think that's even more compelling because there was someone seemingly set up as the crystal boss of Chapter 3, and then wasn't. That's right, it's finally time to talk about Ramb. Ramb is the most interesting NPC in the entire game in my opinion, and it's why I wanted to make this video so badly. That's just because so many people, including myself, thought he would have the Shadow Crystal. This is mostly just because he gives off weird vibes, but there are a few other signs. He talks about freedom a lot, which is probably the biggest sign because the first two crystal bosses love freedom. Jevil considers himself truly free despite being imprisoned, and Spamton is a puppet on strings who yearns for freedom. Gerson is a bit less obvious, but he does talk about the prophecy and how he considers it not set in stone, so in other words, the freedom to change fate. Also during his fight, it says the air crackles green with freedom, which is so funny to me, like what does that even mean? Anyway, Ramb talks about how the games backstage are true freedom, and how freedom is, quote, a thing for big shots. He might actually be the character who says the word freedom the most. Is he? Hold on. Okay, after searching through the Deltarune dialogue text dump, I've come to the conclusion that Spamton does actually say it more, but Ramb is a close second. This also leads to the funny conclusion that, unless I'm missing something, the only other characters to say the word freedom besides Spamton, Ramb, and the narrator are Jevil and Pizza Pants. No, that's not a joke. Pizza Pants Crystal Boss of Chapter 6, you guys aren't ready. Anyway, back to Ramb. He also knows more than the other characters. I'm mainly referring to the fact that he saw Chris open the Dark Fountain, even asking Chris what the reason was and if it was such a good idea. Finally, is less a theme of other crystal bosses and more just a strange detail, is how little Ramb fits in. At the end of Chapter 3, you can get this dialogue from a random Pippin. I won't read it in full because it's quite long, but he basically talks about how Ramb never really fit in, ending it with, "No one will shed a tear for him. Inside, he was probably stoned already." Okay, side note, why is the hardest line in Deltarune said by this random nothing character? Like seriously, this quote is fire, and it's just said out of nowhere by a random enemy, it's crazy. Anyway, those are the main reasons people thought Ramb would be the crystal boss. So that leads to the question, should he have? Well, that's obviously subjective, and me personally, I think I would have given him a boss fight. Don't get me wrong, I get why it is the way it is. I like how it mixes things up, and the whole theory of the knight being too late to hand out the Shadow Crystal is really interesting, but if I can be honest, the knight just isn't that satisfying to me. That brings up the question of how a Ramb boss fight would even go, as well as how John Mantle would relate to this. After all, I like that fight a lot and don't want to get rid of it. So here's my preposition. Remember, I'm not a writer or game developer, so I'm sure there are better ideas that could be done with this. If you guys want to suggest your own ideas, please feel free to. In fact, I would love to read them. This is just what came to mind first to me after a bit of thinking. I would keep the S-rank minigames mostly unchanged. I like the lore and style of them, so I think they should stay. You get the Shadow Mantle as normal, and here's where you can go one of two ways. I'll lay them both out and say which one I prefer. Now you could have Ramb come in after this and fight you. I know at this point he's turned into stone, which I like, but remember in my version of things, he gets the Shadow Crystal earlier and has to function as a boss, so let's just say he didn't turn to stone. I also know having another fight right after the last one might be a bit much, but Tenna and the Knight do the same thing in like 2 rooms, so. As for why he fights you, there's a million reasons you could go with, and I'll explain mine in a minute. Before that, let's discuss the other way this fight could go. You get the Shadow Mantle like normal, and then you leave. You leave the room and meet back up with Susie and Rouse, just like how it usually goes. You might think, where's the boss then? I mean, Tenna is like 2 rooms away at this point. Well, yeah, 2 rooms away. There's this room after the John fight, but before Tenna. It's pretty pointless in the main story, so why not have Ramb interrupt you here? You might be asking what the point of laying out these 2 possibilities is if they're just a few rooms apart, and that's simple. Your party members. Basically, do we want this fight to be a solo Chris fight or a fight with Susie and Rouse by our side? There's good reasons for both, but personally I like solo Chris more. This is for a few reasons which I'll get into, but I want to quickly discuss why I chose these 2 rooms in particular to have the fight in. Well, aside from being the only 2 rooms we really could do it in, I also like how they both have a game console and screen in the middle. I just think you can maybe do something fun with that. Maybe you can have Ramb plug into it like a controller. He is a plug after all. Plus just having a big screen would make for a cool background. Anyway, let's assume Chris is alone. First off, this would allow for more interesting dialogue. At this point in the story, Susie and Rousey don't know Chris made the Dark Fountain. Or at least Susie doesn't. Rousey's a bit too weird to tell. But if Susie and Rousey were fighting with Chris, it would limit dialogue a lot, since I doubt they could reveal that information in just a crystal boss and nowhere else. We actually have a perfect example of the kind of dialogue we could get. Like I said earlier, Ramb talks to us about if opening the Dark Fountain was a good idea. So let's remove that dialogue and put it in the crystal boss. Ramb could discuss the consequences we're having on others and what our motive was. I just think that'd be cool for a crystal boss. I also can't lie, I enjoy solo fights a lot. The chapter 4 crystal boss is a solo fight against Gerson with Susie, and while Chris technically got a solo fight with Snowgrave, Spamps, and Neo, that's exclusive to the weird route. I'd like to see one on the normal route as well. As for why Ramb would be fighting us, it's sort of hard to say. The Shadow Crystal seems to make people go insane, so you could just be lazy and say, oh, he's crazy. But I personally don't really like that. Ramb clearly had a deep connection with Chris, so even being insane, I doubt he would just randomly fight them. We learned from the Pippin dialogue earlier that Ramb was always trying to do what's best for Chris, so why not expand on this? What if Ramb thinks he's doing this for the greater good? What if he thinks he's freeing Chris? Chris isn't free currently. They're stuck under the player's control and aren't happy about it. What if Ramb was able to pick up on this and is trying to save Chris from us? That could be really interesting, at least in my opinion. I don't know, I just enjoy the idea of a crystal boss trying to save us by fighting us. I also have a few ideas of how the fight itself could go, but not too many. I think it'd be cool if Ramb had attacks similar to Werewire and Werewire, since he's very clearly similar and is a plug as well. Obviously it couldn't be too similar or it wouldn't be a unique boss, but maybe a couple illusions here and there wouldn't hurt. I also want to discuss soul color. The biggest disappointment about the night was that they didn't change your soul color at all. Jevil didn't either, but he was the first, so you could argue that red was sort of his color. Spamps and Neo was yellow, and Gerson was green. But unfortunately the knight just reuses red, making it a repeat. Now obviously there's no rule saying that every crystal boss has to have different soul colors. More so it's just a theory I really liked and was hoping for. So for a Ramb fight, I would definitely change your soul color. To what? I'm not sure. I don't really think dark blue would fit this fight, and while purple could be interesting, I also struggle to visualize it. Personally, I would have used one of the two new soul colors. See, in Undertale, both cyan and orange are never used in fights, so why not break one out here? I just think it could be interesting. I was really hoping that these would have been introduced in Deltarune. I mean, there's 7 soul colors and 7 chapters, it would have worked perfectly. I guess it wasn't meant to be. Alright, that's enough Ramb fanfic for the day. I've thoroughly filled my insanity quota, so I can stop now. Is my crystal boss preposition perfect? No, obviously not. I mean, for starters, it involves fighting John Mantle, Ramb, Tenna, and the Knight all in the span of about 3 rooms, so that's sort of an issue. I also realize some of you may be wondering what the point of the Knight fight would be if there's no Shadow Crystal attached to it. Like, why would we even be motivated to win if we don't get that? And my solution is just to give the player the same weapon they get for being the Knight normally, the Black Shard, and making that the reward. Maybe to balance it, Ramb would only give you a Shadow Crystal and not a weapon or armor, giving you more motivation to do this really hard fight. Overall, it's just hard to say whether this would be an improvement or not. The only way I could ever tell is if we were in an alternate dimension where it was made officially in the game, and unfortunately that's probably not happening anytime soon. However, I do think this video was fun, just to explore Chapter 3's Crystal Boss. I hope even if you hated my ideas, you could at least understand them, and I hope the people who don't play Deltarune weren't really confused by this video. I apologize if you were. That's about all I had to say. Again, if you think you have a better idea on how the Crystal Boss could have gone, please share it down below. I would love to hear you guys' thoughts on this. I know this is another Deltarune video, which some of you might not be thrilled by, but I'm still obsessed and would like to talk about it some more. I hope that's okay with you guys. Until next time, I hope you have a good day, and I'll see you soon. Bye-bye. Wait. Oi. Love. In it. Ramb is British? That's it. Cancel the video. Cancel the boss. It's all for nothing.